Y'all, welcome back to Kentucky Fried Wargaming, where two guys who aren't qualified to talk about anything decide to talk about a game with hard math and chance. I'm Joe.
And I'm John.
And on this episode, John's actually here.
Yeah, I've made a habit this year of getting sick and not being able to be on the show. Like, I'll 100% do the show, like tired and sick, but I really don't want that voice to come through of me just being like, hey, everybody, what's up? I got blessed by Nurgle.
Like you're 300 years old, you smoked Marlboro Reds every single day for your entire life.
I was taking 5-minute smoke breaks every 6 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. In John's defense, he did sound absolutely atrocious.
Yeah.
Like
I tried to
we got together to actually record. We did. We sat down. We're like, let's record. And then, no.
Joe, you're not.
I can't do this to the listeners. It's not morally right, John. It's not right.
I just don't even want to hear it. I don't want to hear this.
I don't want to be here. And I'm your recording partner. Like, I absolutely cannot imagine just like, ooh, I'm listening to a relaxing show on my Tuesday morning work commute. Oh, God, Nurgle is in my ear.
Yeah.
No. However, John has passed the clearance check. He's no longer Typhoid Mary, so now he's allowed back on the show. Where we could actually try to this two-man podcast, which is wild. And also pretty good considering the sort of spicy internet place we find ourselves in.
Yeah.
It requires two people.
Wargaming used to be a bastion of like joy and escapism and fun, and now people on the internet get real big mad about a codex that first came out in 2017. It's
sacred lore, John. Sacred lore.
It's like 7 years old, y'all.
It's sacred. Yeah, it's a spicy place on the internet lately. And I would argue like half of it's justified. So we instead are going to pivot away from the spice because you can't make me talk about it at gunpoint. I won't do it. I will not do a rage episode.
I mean, you can get me to talk about female custodians at gunpoint, but not in a way that, like, some people are expecting me to talk about.
I am picturing Tormund Giant's Bane gifs playing through my head. The big woman lady. Here.
Big lady.
John has never been more enticed into joining the guard. He was already in, but now he's in. We are instead going to pivot and talk about what, in my opinion, is one of the least spicy ways to engage with the wargaming hobby. The least sort of spiky and turdish in a way. And that is narrative gaming.
Yeah.
Because it's one of those things that, like, people have talked about some in the community as an alternative to playing some of these bigger games or more streamlined games, 40k, AOS, stuff like that. And sometimes these discussions kind of do rear their heads during times like this, when people are unhappy with the company for various reasons, or they're unhappy with the game for various reasons. And they start looking around for alternatives. And one of the ones that I think is sort of evergreen and comes up from time to time, quietly in the background, is narrative gaming and narrative games in general. But if you're out there listening to us, and you might be a more casual player of these games, you might be newer, you might just be less tapped into the broader scene. And I thought it was worth the time to sort of pump the brakes and to break down what that means if you've seen that online. And maybe it'll be for you. But before we do that, first, hobby time and games played. All right, John. What have you been up to? I feel like it's been ages since we did a podcast.
Yeah. So, what have I been doing? I got back into Star Wars Legion. For a long time listening to the show, you know that I got back into Star Wars Legion a long time ago. Bought a bunch of models, sold those models, and then bought new models, because I was like, I'm going to play clones. I've gone back to playing Rebels.
It ends where we began.
But I've built them. Built some of them. I'm building the others. Working on that. I'm probably gonna play some games this weekend. Which, learn some of that Star Wars Legion stuff. Last weekend I played some Conquest, had some wigs, had some beer, had a real beer hammer experience playing Conquest. Played against our buddy Nick at our shop and against Dwigham. That was a grand time. Other than that, just been working on terrain stuff. I'm working on like a truck for Necromunda because I want to try that out. I've been looking into a bunch of new like games to try, just sort of like going wherever the motivation is, and it's all over the place. So I'm just sort of doing stuff all over the place. It's been pretty fun. Things will change in a couple weeks when I get my Tauntaur in, which I'm going to be working on. I got to work on the big dinosaur. But other than that, just like more Conquest, because Conquest is great. Learning some new games. Taking a break from some other games. And we got Joe HammerCon in a couple of weeks to play 40K. That's about it.
It's a good hobby time. It's a little all over the place. It's a bit of an ADHD hobby summary, but like mine ain't going to be any better, so I can't give you too much crap.
Yeah, it's fine. I give myself a little bit of like scatterbrainedness in the hobby as a treat for like a couple months out of the year. Makes the rest of the year way more balanced. That's a lie.
It's not how that works at all. But I like this I want this for you. I want it to be true. Mine is really not a whole lot better though. I had a game day with our buddy Tanner, and we played Silverbayonet. We played Star Wars Legion. We played Age of Sigmar. Got 3 games in a day, which was really fun. So I did a lot of hobbying for that, basing my clone army that I fully painted. But I didn't have any basic material on them or anything, so I got that done, which felt really nice, and got magnets on them so they could be transported. I also did some research on Silverbayonet so I could learn how to play it before we, got there and kind of refreshed my memory on the game. Had a good time. Killed a bunch of werewolves. My hunting crew, just like putting dogs down at the pound. And I hate it, but in that one instance, it was quite useful before I got mauled. It was rough. Ha. 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 And then, taught him Star Wars Legion. And his Wookiees tried to fight my clones, and just like the simulations, clone superiority all around. But a very fun learning game, which was really great. And in addition to prepping all of those Legion models, which I will admit took me a little bit, I've also been doing terrain prep to try to get ready for Joe HammerCon. There is a lot of it that has to be prepped, and it's got a lot of like plastic printer supports that I'm working at trying to tear off and get ready to paint. And doing some paint planning for that as well, because it is going to be different than painting my like regular Tau. My regular Tau is done mostly through airbrush, which has worked out really nicely for me in terms of an army. But for this much terrain, there ain't no way in hell that I'm gonna be able to paint all of this terrain out of airbrush only. It would just take too long. So instead, I'm going to convert my Tau paint scheme plans to a rattle can sort of assembly situation, and then come through with like weathering techniques afterwards and get it done. But before I do that, I gotta get all the supports off for the primer to do its thing. Working on it. And then secondarily, I've also done some research into other game systems like hametsu and Rangers of Shadow Deep. Some to prep for the last episode, some to prep for future episodes. Spoiler. And I think I'm going to try to paint some more of my actual Tau army. We'll see how that goes. I think, like, my want to play 40k is kind of low currently, just like across the board. If I'm being a little honest, like it doesn't have the je ne sais quoi. But I am trying to find it. And I think maybe picking up and painting another unit of robots will do it for me. Give it a whirl.
Maybe.
Can't hurt to try.
Yeah. We'll see how the actual event goes, because I think the actual event will be a blast. But similarly, I am struggling to like paint my world eaters.
Like, I want to hang out with my folks and see them, and we're going to have a blast. And, like, they're the part I'm really looking forward to. It's not the 40K itself,
Yeah.
which makes it a little hard to want to, like, paint stuff. Really, the thing that's keeping me going on is, like, prepping this table of terrain, because I don't want to let people down. I want them to have that table of terrain to play on. Just, whoo, buddy. It's a lot of work. So we're kind of feeling it out. And lastly, been doing some research into Necromunda and trying to put together a little gang to start learning that game. Our buddy Nick at the shop was very cool about it. And especially after prying a little more, we brought up the idea of like, hey, Nick, would you mind teaching us Necromunda? And he internally had the moment from that movie Warm Bodies of just, don't be creepy, don't be creepy, don't be creepy, don't be creepy. Sure, love to. Because that's his favorite game ever, and he damn near shit his pants with excitement when we mentioned trying Necromunda and getting other people into it a little. So I might try to piggyback his excitement and try to get some demo games in of Necromunda and see if I can't make that a staple locally. It's very different than what I have played before. So that'll be a whole new world that I'm interested to dive into.
Yeah, I think the thing that really separates it from the rest of like the normal wargaming sphere oftentimes is just how ingrained and entrenched it is in narrative.
Mm-hmm. From the ground up, it is about the story, and everything else matters less.
Yep.
And in fact, it's part of what brought up the discussion today. Let's talk about it. John, narrative.
Yeah.
How do we even start to attack this giant, broad spectrum classification of wargaming genre?
So, in simplest terms, narrative is the story behind the games you're playing, right? So, like, if we if we just wanted to play what is effectively a narrativeless game, you'd just play chess, right?
Mm-hmm.
To a degree, everyone gets into these games because of narrative, right? People love 40K because of Space Marines and Eldar and Tyranids and Chaos.
All the big Chaos dudes.
Right.
Yeah.
Like people love Age of Sigmar because like the fantasy stuff and all the cool stuff that you can do in it, and like the dwarves and the dragons and the yada yada yada. People like Star Wars Legion because Star Wars is cool, right?
Mm-hmm.
People like Conquest because they love 7-foot tall orc mommies riding dinosaurs. I don't make the rules, that's just how stuff is, right? But narrative gaming as its like sort of perspective and as the goal is different than normal match play. Right, so like what people would normally call wargaming, which is like an average game of 40K or an average game of like fantasy or Age of Sigmar, is sort of just, I have 2,000 points of an army, you have 2,000 points of an army, and we are going to play on one of like 6 to 12 missions that are agreed upon as like the current season of games with like agreed upon secondaries that everyone knows and everyone's planned around and everyone discusses on the internet and everyone like creates lists around and there's like a meta and there's things involved, right? Like that's what people would call the normal wargaming experience.
Mm-hmm. Balance is the focus. You want it to be even.
Right. Narrative wargaming takes all of that and throws it out the window.
Yes.
It just says there are no rule that is not worth breaking, and everything can be nuts. And instead of having a balanced experience, the goal is to have a narrative experience, to have a experience that is rooted in what are we trying to accomplish narratively, right? If we are trying to create a very tough, horror-based, like scary sort of scenario, we might incorporate mechanics that makes everything a little bit scarier, makes everything a little bit more like mysterious. If we're going to try to make something a desperate situation, we might involve like a lot of mechanics that allow units to come back while other units can't, and just all sorts of different things.
Or maybe one army gets more points to start with than the other, like depending on the story you tried to tell.
Right. So like that's how you can put narrative into like a 40K or an AOS, like an already established game that you probably already have miniatures for. Like an example is that I have played before a narrative game for 40k in which I was playing Chaos Space Marines, and the opponents had there was 3 guys, and they all had an even amount of army that were all Imperium, different Imperium stuff, and I had 6,000 points of Chaos Space Marines. My Chaos Space Marines could respawn on a 4-up when they died on my deployment zone. Theirs could not, but their entire objective was to hold a position and not allow any of my units past the walls. So for every unit I got past the walls, I got a point. For every unit they still had at the end of the game behind their walls, they got a point. And if I didn't have enough points at turn 5, they won, regardless. Right?
And we also had the benefit of cover because, we got fortified walls. That's the story.
So we built the table to have huge industrial walls that they could hide behind and garrison behind. They had certain artillery strikes they could use as instead of having a stratagem cost to them, they just got to use them X amount of times throughout the game. Right? Just we just broke a bunch of rules and we purposely made it unbalanced, right? In no way is this close to balanced. We might have tried to make it still fun and fair-ish.
Best we can.
It was not going to be a representative of a balanced game at all. Right? That is very fun, and that's definitely one way you can approach narrative. The other way is that there are some games that are just built from the ground up to be narrative experiences. Something like a silverbayonet or a necromunda specifically, is sort of built to be this smaller scale, gang level, maybe 10 to 20 miniatures tops of dudes.
Actually, I think the most is 10. No, 15, sorry. It's that small.
And so your entire purpose is to name every one of your dudes, give them very specific weapons. You do these super unique missions that have very interesting different rules to them. You could lose guys throughout the campaign where you have multiple games that lead into different stories. Guys can get injured. You can buy gear for other guys. This is again by no means balanced. Any sort of resemblance of a competitive scene here doesn't exist. This is purely to have tell a story with your friends. It's like mixing Dungeons and Dragons with your more crunchy sort of wargaming experience. For instance, if you're a person who plays Dungeons and Dragons and you really like having a narrative, but also you really like grid-based RPG combat, a certain brand of D&D is good for you. Same here with wargaming, right? It's another option for playing the game in a way that is different than you.
Yeah. The necromunda example, I would say let's say we start a campaign, right? John and I are going to we're each going to have a little gang and we're going to start the campaign. At the start, we're each going to get the same amount of points to spend at the beginning. Cool. So we get a little bit of even keel balance, so to speak. We're getting the same amount of points to spend. We're going to spend them differently, but we're going to have the same amount. We go play our first mission. I get real unlucky. My leader gets badly wounded. They're going to be at -1 health for the rest of the league. Oh god, that's terrible. That's real bad. And maybe my big lieutenant dude gets domed by a plasma gun and he's just dead. Now I am down 200 points of my 1,000 points. John has a really good first match. John made money on his match. John goes up to 1,100 points. I'm still at 8. He's at 11. Balance is gone. It's gone. So be it. That's okay. Because the whole point was that now we have the funny story about how my dude stuck out his head for the first match ever and then got sniped in the face by a plasma gun. Which is hysterical.
Yeah, we get to laugh about it.
And that's okay, and that's the point. And I think that's what really, for me, the big difference in genre between narrative-focused games and matched play-focused games in terms of base assumptions is really down to the idea that in matched play-oriented games, balance is really at the core of these games to try to give a sort of pseudo-competitive environment where two opponents can try to test their skills against one another, and as even of a way as they can. And there is certainly story and fluff behind it. The books are great for a lot of these games, but it's kind of in the background. It's set dressing. It's a bonus, not the pure end-all be-all focus. And for narrative, it's the opposite. It's that the story is king, and the balance is secondary, maybe even further down in the priority list.
Yeah. Sometimes it's just not even on the priority list at all.
Just depends on the game's design. I mean, what it's going for. Necromunda, I would say it's like secondary because there's still some effort, but it's not the point. And that's how you could kind of tell a narrative-oriented game versus a matched play-oriented game. But if you know what they are, then the question becomes, why should you consider playing them? And why we enjoy narrative-oriented games instead of just playing matched play games for the entirety of our wargaming career and for our wargaming time. Because I think for some people, they assume that that is the baseline and that that's like the best way for everyone to play. But there are other preferences and perspectives, and maybe you're someone who would have a good time with games like that.
Yeah, I think really there's sort of two big camps when it comes to narrative games, right? You have games that you already play in a match play sort of way, that you want to like kind of dip your toes into doing narratively. And then you have games that in which the entire premise is to just do narratively, right? Like we just talked about in the last like little bit. And like to sort of go with the first one, right? Of like, why would you take a game like 40K that is like very clearly sort of balanced and built around playing in matched play and play it narratively with wacky, weird like missions? Maybe you want to simulate the books. Maybe you just want to like a change of pace, right? I think really that's the biggest one, is it can kind of get boring to play the same style of 40K over and over and over again. Especially if it's just you and your buddy, and you guys have both been playing like Tyranids versus Space Marines because you got the Leviathan box together in these like competitive ways for like a year, right? You might want to bust out a mission where your Space Marine friend gets 1,500 points, you get a full 2,000 points, but you also get to respawn, and he gets like a bunch of extra cool war gear or weapons or like special stratagem uses, and maybe he deploys differently and like does like a cool last stand Helldiver style.
You're trying to recreate the trailer.
Yeah.
Like, you want to do the trailer thing. Cool.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
That's super fun, right? Like that is fun. It's interesting. But more so than just that, I think that it is also a good opportunity to sort of like utilize each psychographic profile. Which like for those who are not familiar, there's three. There's something called a Timmy, something called a Johnny, and there's something called a Spike, right? Timmy normally like really, really wants a cool thing to happen. Johnny really normally wants like to do a thing in a weird way, right? They want to uncover the puzzle, figure out the puzzle. A Spike sees a challenge and wants to rise to that challenge to like prove something, right? There's a sort of the three things. And so the way the narrative can really benefit a group of people who play these games together, because you probably have, everybody has a portion of each of these, and everyone in your group probably has one that is more than the other, is you get to have a moment where like the Timmy gets to propose a cool idea, right? The Johnny gets to help make that idea work mechanically, and the Spike gets the challenge of how do I still play this game with these new parameters, right? How do I get to do this thing in a way that is interesting? And that sort of creates an environment where no matter how you interact with this game, there is something for you in what you're doing here.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. It's like, don't get me wrong, I think regular match play can be for everyone as well. There are aspects, but if you've only done that and you're trying to play efficiently, so to speak, and you're playing the same missions, eventually Timmy is going to realize that bringing the stuff that looks cool might just get him obliterated, and he won't get to do a cool thing, which will kind of rain on his parade. Johnny might realize that his cool, wacky combos don't actually function in purely, like, efficiency standards and in match play, that there's really only one way to play the book in any way that functions, in which case, there goes all Johnny's mad scientist list building. No, it's rain on parade. And then lastly is Spike, who, like, you might think, oh, surely, Spike, who wants to win, which isn't actually what Spike wants, but like Spike, who is perceived as being want to win. Surely they just want match play forever. And some might. However, I would argue that If you are a spike who wants to challenge yourself and prove that you could overcome them, if eventually you've already done it and it's not satisfying. Like,
Now you need a new challenge.
You want a new challenge. You want to try a new thing to prove you can do it there. To try to solve that. It's just a nice way to, give a little variety, which is the spice of life.
Yeah, and I think that that's like really the key here, right? Is you take a game like AOS or 40K that you already play a bunch of, and you start playing it narratively. It really just it's a new way to use your toys, right? You were just getting to use maybe old missions from books that are no longer valid. Maybe you get to use like terrain pieces that have been sitting on the shelf forever. Maybe you get to play armies that are technically dead or units that are technically underpowered. And you get to just like add weird rules to make them playable again in this weird way that really just, it's not balanced. And everyone signs up to that social contract ahead of time for this weird environment. Right? And it doesn't necessarily even have to be mechanically changing things. It can also be something as simple as every one of these tables has a little narrative blurb next to it to help inform what objectives you're fighting over. So while you're playing this game with your opponent, using match play rules, using points balance, you can explain to each other why your dudes are doing these things, and it might actually just make you change some of the decisions you make to make the game interesting and fun for you. Like that you can do it as light or as heavy as you want, and it's very customizable. But on the other side of that, right, is you have something like Necromunda that is customizable and it is shiftable, but you are never going to be able to play that competitively, right? Like, you're not going to play that game in a competitive fashion. It's not what it's built for. It's built from the ground up to be wacky, right? It does all that work for you. It puts in all of that rules changes. It puts in all of these options. It does all these things to make it just a really unique and weird and wacky experience. And so, really, if you're wanting to engage with narrative stuff, you sort of have to make the decision of, do you want to play like a skirmish, sort of built from the ground up wacky campaign game? Or do you want to do like a really hard, drawn out army, like 40K sort of narrative experience where you're writing all the rules yourself? And really, you can only answer that question.
And I think that's the beauty of it, is that you can customize it per your group. Because every group's different. Every group's going to have different levels of preference or entrenchment in pre-existing notions and conditions. And this is one that you could tailor to any group to find something for yourself. Something. Somewhere. You might have to really go about discussing it carefully, because the idea could be kind of wild to some folks. But just be patient. Work through it together. And you could figure something out.
Yeah, it's a very, very good way of sort of breathing life into a hobby that you might sort of get in the doldrums with, right? Like, whenever we talked about earlier, lots of drama pops up in the wargaming sphere, or like maybe the new edition's just not jiving with you, or maybe there's just like a bunch of stuff that just doesn't fit well with you that's going on, or maybe just like updates are coming too fast and you can't keep up with it. It's really nice to be able to just take a step back and be like, all right, I'll pull out all my weird Firstborn Marines, and we're going to play a game with my Firstborn Marines versus, like, old, ancient Dark Eldar. Right? It's sort of like an evergreen, divorced from the sort of hype cycle way of playing the game. It's very, very, very satisfying to be able to dip into every once in a while.
It's refreshing. Like, truly, that is the way I would define narrative in a lot of ways for me. I mean, granted, like, I fall mostly into, like, Timmy and Johnny. So, like, of course it's refreshing to me. But, like, it just opens up a whole cornucopia of fun experiences that I just do not get in matched play most of the time. Which is great. And if you're out there and you're interested, I would recommend giving it a whirl. At least starting the conversation, and if people are hesitant, start on the lighter end with maybe just adding some story, or maybe like the lightest of mechanical changes to test stuff. And if people are really into it, and you want to do whole campaigns, then you can go whole hog. Why not? And the fun part is that they're very light. there's no money riding on it. It's purely a good time. So if you do duff it up in your first campaign and go, oh Lord, we made a bunch of mistakes in how we set this up. Cool. Fix them. You're not in a match play tournament bracket. You don't have to go back and fix your old pairings. Like you can purely, you are the master of this universe. You can do whatever you want, which is sort of invigorating. It's refreshing and it's freeing when you're learning a new thing. Mm-hmm. And speaking of which, if you are wanting to maybe investigate narrative, then the question comes up of, okay, I want to maybe try some narrative stuff. And maybe I want to try some stuff that isn't just adding a couple of twists to 40K and AOS or whatever you're currently playing. What stuff is narrative? And it's a broad thing and it's hard to condense, and we tried.
Yeah, so, like, some suggestions we can give you, right? Again, we're going to try to, like, break down some army ones, some skirmish ones. The hard part is that the vast majority of narrative games are sort of built as skirmish games, right? They just are. The biggest one I would say that isn't built from the ground up to be skirmish, to be narrative, but could very easily be made just very, very narrative. You can even engage with it almost entirely narratively if you want to. It's going to surprise some of you. Star Wars Legion.
Man, if you want to just get out there with your friend to go and then recreate fights from the movies, you can.
Yeah. Just do it. Just do it. Like, if you want to be like, I want to know what the Battle of Kashyyyk looks like, all right.
Set up a beach.
One buddy buys a bunch of droids, one buddy buys a bunch of clones, and you have them fight. Like, you can just do that. Which I think that is sort of a reenactment style narrative game, right? Mm-hmm. And the game does not require you to like put a lot of effort into making that narrative, simply because the nature of the IP sort of built it for you. Right?
Yeah, I mean, odds are you watched the movies or the shows and you were sold before you ever walked up to the table. Like So you've got a blueprint to run off of. You're just translating at this point to a miniature game.
Right, but beyond that, we're going to talk about some skirmish games, right? First one, we've been talking about it all episode. We're going to get right into it. Necromunda. It's like the narrative game. When people talk about doing a narrative game, when people talk about like a skirmish style, fun campaign adventure, it's Necromunda. I mean, Necromunda is something that people even say is not so much of a war game as it is playing D&D. Because
after diving into the rulebook, I could see that a lot.
Yeah, it's very similar. It does a lot of cool stuff. It's very interesting. It's very fun. If you haven't looked into it, you probably should, especially if you're like a long-time GW like customer. If you've been playing 40K for a long time, you've been playing AOS for a long time, you've been playing Fantasy for a long time, you've never taken a look at like Mordheim or Necromunda.
Ooh, Mordheim was going to be my go-to for like the narrative game, but Necromunda is tied for first with me.
Yeah, like those two games are the narrative games, right? When people talk about it, they come from there, right? They've been around forever. Take a look. There's lots of resources out there. There's lots of people who just like really dive into it. It's very, very cool. We're starting to get Necromunda for the first time. It's been a mistake to not do it sooner, right?
Yeah.
It's great.
The hard part, though, was that no one around here played, that I knew of. That's the way I'll phrase that. I didn't know there was an active group anywhere. And from my understanding, near me, I actually don't think there really was. So now that it's starting up, I'm looking forward to getting into it. But I tried the computer game. I've been reading the rules, watched a bunch of battle reports. It's a wonderful game. If you're down for making a gang, you want to have some giggles, and you are totally cool if your stuff gets obliterated. Because it might. Because you're not going to be able to optimize your way around having a fight that's at a train depot, and then, you rolled the wrong dice, and woo-woo, the train's coming, and you're underneath its tracks. So you are now paced. Great efficiency.
Another game, right? Like, there's some miniatures agnostic games out there, like Silverbayonet, right? Silverbayonet, something that, like, our buddy Tanner loves. He loves this game. It's like his game. It is a monster hunting game where you play like Napoleonic War soldiers who are trying to monster hunt stuff and do like little missions. It's like Bloodborne meets Total War Napoleon.
Yeah, it's like, it reminds me of Hunt Showdown, if I'm being honest. A lot like Hunt Showdown.
Yeah, and so like it's very interesting. It's like it has like PvE and PvP elements where you have like monsters that are fighting both people, and both people are also like trying to fight the monsters and each other. It's a great time.
It's really fun. You could get wacky with it, and the monsters are tuned to kick your ass. Like that's the point. Is your guys with muskets and some like hand clubs or swords, and you're fighting stuff like werewolves. They're gonna mangle you. They're gonna mangle you, and that's the fun. Like it's not meant to be an equal balance between monster and man. The monsters are horrifying, and the horror would be gone if it was balanced. And over the course of a campaign, your guys are going to die or get wounded or gain gear or experience, what have you. But you're going to get a hell of a story one way or the other, and it probably won't be balanced by the end in any way, shape, or form. That's the appeal. And it's also written by Joseph McCullough, so again, great art, wonderful rules baseline that he uses for a lot of his stuff. You'll be seeing a video on it on the channel. Not too long, I imagine. Spoilers.
Yeah, and like more Joseph stuff, he's got like Rangers of Shadowdeep, which we just did an episode about. Also similarly, very good.
It's more D&D. It's closer to D&D than tabletop.
Yes.
War games. But it's very narrative. Again, you're going to make your Rangers. You're going to name them. They're going to have progression. They're going to have experience. They're going to have gear. And you're going to get companions. And then they're going to have problems. And similarly, monsters are scary, man. Not balanced. That's the fun.
Speaking of monsters, not balanced and fun, you want to tell me about that wacky Japanese game you've been getting into?
Hametsu! Yeah. So, same idea. You're going to notice a theme, because Joe, hunt monster. That's, log type theme. I was handed the... what was it? Monster Hunter's Handbook or the Demonologist's Handbook? The
Monsterologist?
I'm gonna look. I'm looking right now. Demonologist. I'm gonna look this up right now. While we're recording the podcast. Dang it! I did not see it. We're gonna put it in post. I'm gonna put it on the screen. But I was handed this cool pop-up interactive book. Way too young. And now I'm just into things that are hunting monsters for the rest of my life. Nothing that can be done. Sorry. Watched too much Supernatural. Carry on my wayward son. I'm in forever. And in this one, it takes that flavor, which I really, really love, and then combines it with another flavor that I adore, and that is, as you would imagine, cool, sort of late feudal era samurai. Of various types. Samurai! Where you make a unit of hunters. You each make your own hunter. There's a level up system in it. Out of a number of schools and classes, and you pick abilities and combos, and then you go out to hunt Oni of small variety or big, horrifying boss monster variety in a feudal Japan that has undergone a horrible dark magic cataclysm. And now terrible beasts and spirits are overflowing the land. And again, you're going to play through pre-made stories. You're going to maybe make your own stories. You might homebrew some monsters. But the thing that is going to be true the whole time is that it's not going to be exactly balanced because you're there for the campaign of it. You're there to see your party grow. You're there to get your skills. You're there to do busted combos on these poor monsters that you're going to try to dunk on. And they're probably going to then try to dunk on you. And that is a thing that you're going to have to be buckled up for a long term and see what kind of story you're going to tell. Now, Hametsu, I have not personally played myself. So I've watched a whole bunch of stuff around it. I own the book, read the book front to back. So I am very much wanting to get it on my own personal table, but it's one I can recommend easily. It's made by Blacksite Studios, who has a proven track record of supporting their games very well.
And Blacksite Studios has lots of weird stuff like that, and truly I sort of want to end the episode really pushing into like this is where we're seeing the most amount of new stuff coming out for, right? I think this is where you're seeing the most amount of like new game and like miniatures agnostic and really easier games to get into are coming from these sort of like narrative based experiences where they really just sort of expect you to buy a book and that's it. And they just kind of run with whatever that is. And it's really low barrier of entry for the most part, much lower barrier of entry than something like 40K or Age of Sigmar, which is like a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of work. So there's also a really good opportunity to take something like your D&D group and get them invested into like playing a war game instead of having to just drop into an Age of Sigmar or drop into a 40K. They can sort of try out something like hametsu or silverbayonet or one of these other like smaller narrative-based games and then work their way into doing one of these other games if they want to.
Yeah, there's the lack of emphasis on core balance, mechanically speaking, means that generally there's less mechanics in general that are core to the experience. And you don't need to learn as much up front, not only in terms of hobby dollars, but just in terms of like neural load and effort to start playing. You know, if you look at a giant rulebook like Warhammer 40K, and then you also look at all the codexes, you're going to look at that and think, good lord, how much do I have to know to start? And the answer is probably a lot, depending on where your anchor point is on that perspective. But for a game that is more narrative, that has less concrete rules, the load is inherently smaller for someone like that, because there's just less to memorize. And that, you know, has some drawbacks, don't get me wrong. There are cons with every one of these benefits. That if you are a person who purely wants crunchy, mass play, depth, you're not going to get it there. Fair enough. But it is also an opportunity to either get a type of fun that you don't get otherwise, or to get people in who otherwise wouldn't be interested in maybe playing at all. And I think that holds a lot of value in both cases. And it's why, for us, I expect that narrative games are going to be part of the roster for the entire time that we're hobbying.
That's something we're going to like dip in and out of regularly.
Yeah. Especially, well, and once we find a dedicated community, I honestly might dip into it more than out of it. But we'll see.
That's true.
We'll see. For now, though, that's all we have. But if there are really cool narrative games out there that we did not mention, because there are some out that I just have no idea exist, because the internet is vast and there's so much cool stuff going on. Please leave them below. I would love to get leads on sick games that I'm super into. Or if you also were handed the Demon Hunter's Handbook, which I found by Abelard Van Helsing. I don't think that's the actual name of the author. You know, I'd like to hear how cool that book was, because it really was. John, there was a letter in the front from Van Helsing telling me that I was his long-lost grandson.
Actual cannibal Van Helsing?
No, John, like cool monster hunter Van Helsing.
Like Hugh Jackman Van Helsing?
I'd like to think so, yes.
I would love to get a letter from Van Helsing right now. Like Hugh Jackman Van Helsing right now. And Wolverine. And the rest of the X-Men.
What if they're connected? Like, what if Hugh Jackman Van Helsing is actually just like it's early Wolverine?
That's a sick story.
Wolverine.
Wolverine.
A narrative game is writing itself in my head. I can't be stopped. Oh, buddy. Wolverine. Y'all out there. This is not all of our thoughts. We're getting more. If y'all out there, please subscribe, like, share it, ask questions if you got them while we ponder the implications of Wolverine. And that's been all of our opinions, bona fide and Kentucky Fried. We'll see y'all on the next one.